last speaker here is Adaeze Enekwechi, also an economist and operating partner at the private equity firm Welsh, Carson, Anderson and Stowe. She's also done stints in the public sector at the Congressional Budget Office, the Medicare Payment Advisory Commission, the Office of Management and Budget. Adaeze, there may be one other that I'm leaving out, but those are the ones near and dear to my heart. And she's going to be sharing her insights into the world of private equity and healthcare. I see you there, and I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Thank you.
You're going to make us smart on private equity.
Oh, gosh. Let me start sharing my screen. Well, good morning. Oh, actually, afternoon, everybody here in the East Coast. My name is Adaeze Enekwechi. I'm an operating partner at an investment firm called Welsh, Carson, Anderson and Stowe. I had, I believe, a hard job of talking about private equity in healthcare, but really not just talking about the business, but also giving an orientation of our space, which is necessary because this is a policy audience and not an investment or finance audience. And I happen to be a policy person, although I'm in a private equity firm. And I guess I'm wearing two hats. So I hope to at least surface some issues and give some context that could be helpful, and would be very happy to take on additional questions during our Q&A. So what is Welsh Carson? As I was listening to everybody talk, we all like to, quarterback, what is it, Monday night quarterback or whatever, Monday morning quarterback, because I was thinking, gosh, I should have had a slide on what is private equity. PE is I think in its simplest form, a form of finance. It's a form of financing in the private market. So it's basically dollars that we take to invest in businesses. And private equity exists in every industry. You see tons of PE activity in utilities and transportation, in tech. Private equity is huge in technology, but it's also a pretty active form of financing activities in the healthcare space. So Welsh Carson is one of many. There are other companies you might have heard of, other firms you might have heard of, TPG, KKR, Vistria, just to name a few, Carlisle, there's so many. We're not a small one. We are only in two industries, healthcare and technology, about 30 billion raised across different funds, and I can answer more questions about what that means. But basically, Welsh Carson tends to focus only on healthcare and technology, which makes us a pretty focused or a pretty specific investment firm with deep sector experience in the healthcare space. And I am in the healthcare side, obviously. This is just a little bit more. I think in the deck that I sent to UC, I put all the about Welsh Carson in the back. So I'm happy to say more about this because I think I want to get into the meat of private equity activity in healthcare. When you think about PE, one thing I've learned is that most people don't know what the source of capital is, and that actually is one of the drivers of misconception or misunderstanding about private equity. When you are the entities that have the ability to write a $10 million check, a $20 million check, at least for Welsh Carson, but this is probably consistent across private equity, are limited partners that basically represent public pension funds. So here are some of our biggest and longest relationships. It's CalPERS, or the California Public Employee Retirement System, CalSTRS, the California State Teachers Retirement. And I don't pull those two because we're, UC in California. They are really some of our biggest and longest relationships. We're talking 20-year relationships. The New York City Employee Retirement System, the state of Minnesota, I know state of Hawaii, state of Connecticut are also on that list. And these are public employees who put in a certain chunk of their earnings into their 401k. And the managers of those retirement funds essentially make decisions about how to invest those huge pools of resources. on their portfolio, they will have most probably going to public equities, which we all know what's happening in the stock market right now. It's a little bit unstable and challenging, but that generally constitutes the bulk of the resources, or the bulk of where dollars are directed for our public retirees. And then you've got private equity. So that's companies like us, which gets maybe 10, 15% on average. And that's basically where the limited partners would say, take these dollars and invest it so that they can balance out their portfolio. You've got public, private, you've got other things, other investment vehicles, so that they can generate returns that would be sustainable for these public employees to retire on. And that's one of the most important things, I think, to understand about private equity, the source of funds. So essentially, if you think about a private equity firm like Welsh Carson, we are managing funds. We're basically fund managers. And then we take those dollars, decide what private sector companies in healthcare, again, we want to invest in. We have an agreement with our limited partners that we will generate a certain amount of return. They hold us accountable. We have quarterly meetings with every LP. They hold us accountable when it comes to our stewardship of those resources. So what are we investing in? How are we sticking to our firm philosophy, which I've got on the slide here? We are focused on building industry defining companies, growth-oriented, not growth-oriented in terms of the venture capital perspective, and I can say more about that, but a company, or at least a sector, that is growing in its scope, in its approach, that is creating a meaningful and differentiated experience for beneficiaries, if it's a Medicare focused or even Medicaid focused company. And I can give examples of that as to what we're doing at Welsh Carson. Let me hopefully pick up where I left off. Welsh Carson is focused on building industry-defining companies. So and this is again important, because as we talk with our LPs, our limited partners, whose funds we are managing, this is what we focus on. These are the questions that they often ask us, and we have to demonstrate that by virtue of the companies we've invested in, by virtue of the companies we are currently conducting diligence on, how we think about not just the asset, the index asset itself, but any additional M&A that we might contemplate in the near or medium term, what we expect to build or create out of that firm, and what we expect to create within that ecosystem. So private equity, again, let me speak to Welsh Carson specifically, because I think all PE firms are not the same. They're not created equal. There's certainly some bad actors. But in our case, with the 40 plus year history in this space, we tend to focus on the long game. Average hold for us is about 5 years. So you see us investing in the executive team, the infrastructure, technology, processes, again, everything that would make a meaningful difference in building a company and scaling it, whether it's serving additional or an expanded pool of patients, or geographic reach, expansion in terms of the different MSAs that are served. Private equity, this slide is basically showing you that the PE deal activity has grown, certainly since, really it's been growing for a while. Healthcare PE has been growing along with it. It doesn't dwarf all the other private equity activities or industry activities in various industries, but it has been growing, certainly in the United States, but I think actually even more so in Europe. Let's see, I'm just going to use the arrow here. Okay, here's what I want to focus on, because I think this is what the meat of the conversation is or might be. What are some of the top areas where healthcare investors are focused on? So it was harder to parse given the time we had between PE and VC. So I'll just try to highlight where I think I was making a point relative to PE versus venture capital. Private equity, for background, tends to be focused on more established companies, as I mentioned. If you think about Welsh Carson, we're looking to write check sizes of 100 tends to be too small. So we're looking at, $300 to $500 million check sizes. So those tend not to be early stage companies that are just beyond a proof of concept. We're generally looking at established companies and looking to take it and grow it. Venture capital tends to be, and there are different stages. You can have VC companies that fund at the seed level. So a company that's just getting off the ground, trying to build out this concept, they may just need to raise 3 million. And so you need, or 5. And then you've got VC, and then there are different series. So maybe that's Series A, there's a $10 million raise. Series B, there could be a $50 million raise as they look to build out additional runway to keep operating and keep growing. So PE, more mature companies, venture capital, earlier stage companies, and smaller in scale. So where are they focused? I think Dr. Malani mentioned this. Healthcare anywhere, health at home is a huge focus for technology, for healthcare companies. That would be my 12-minute or 12-minute marker, but technology ate into my time. So you see primary care, acute care at home, post-acute care at home, lots of those companies popping up. Tech firms, so non-traditional healthcare providers are in this space. A lot of new entrants. They tend to be venture capital focused, although I think we can expect in the next couple of years that some of them, perhaps even in the kidney space, might be mature enough to either go public. So you might see some IPOs in this space, or they're going to be big enough to be acquired by private equity backed or strategic and private equity combination sponsors in the near future. So tons of examples here: ChenMed, CenterWell, Concerto, and a lot of I'm thinking of a company called the HHA Exchange, which focuses on the infrastructure, the backbone. So they built this. It's basically a tech company where the provider at home, so it could be a variety of different types of providers, some clinicians, some non-clinicians, can interact with institutional providers, payers, et cetera, on behalf of one patient. So trying to streamline the process of taking care of patients, especially as we move to non-facility settings. Workforce and staffing, it needs to be mentioned. I think one of our previous speakers just mentioned the fact that health systems are struggling with this mightily. This cannot be overstated. On one of the earlier slides, you'll see that Welsh Carson has a strategic stake in a company called the Health Management Academy, which is basically a peer organization for the 150 largest health systems in the country. So through that engagement, we have direct conversations with health system leaders, CEOs, CFOs, chief operating officer, chief nursing officers in every single meeting, every single conversation. Challenges with workforce, whether it's supply or short supply or maldistribution, is the issue. It's the number one issue. It had been actually a key issue. COVID exacerbated the problem. There's no panacea. Essentially what you have in terms of workarounds are nurse staffing companies that provide locum or contingent staffing needs. Prices went up 150% year over year. It is completely unsustainable. You see a lot of deal activity in this space. The current narrative that you might see is that private equity firms are starting to gobble up or buy up some of these nurse staffing companies. This happens to be an area where I've been working in because we're decidedly not interested in that play. There are real improvements that could be made in terms of workforce optimization, in terms of predictive analytics, so that you could do better sort of surge prediction, and better deploy the staff that you do have. all while we try to figure out what do we do about the main issue, which is that we don't actually have enough nurses in particular. We have similar issues in, respiratory therapists and some of the other allied professionals. But the tech solutions that really scale right now are elusive. Some companies that might bear mentioning, you have Prolucent, which is a new company. It's focused on predictive analytics. You've got others like Trusted Health, CareRev, which are newer companies that have built out tech enablement to help drive specific supply needs or address specific supply and scheduling needs in a number of different health systems. Again, earlier stage companies, and I think there's more to be seen there, but a lot of activity there at the PE and venture capital level. Health IT, I think most folks on this webinar will be aware of. One of the things you'll hear me say, if you've heard me speak before, is that we are not given what we need to do to reach more people where they are at the time that they need it. So, precision medicine sort of defined very broadly. We're just not going to brick and mortar our way through that problem. It's going to continue. It's actually going to expand as the population ages. And as we recognize that unless we deal with some of the, innate inequities in our health system, we're just going to keep having bad outcomes for a significant chunk of the population. So one of the reasons for this relentless investment at the venture capital level and at the private equity level is that tech transformation, tech innovation is at the core of what needs to happen in healthcare for us to realize better outcomes. I think we can have this conversation again. No entity here is investing for altruistic reasons. People are investing because there are expectations that they will realize profits and gains. And the reason why healthcare continues to be a very attractive industry is that it's relatively stable when you think about it. We've got major government purchasers between Medicare and Medicaid. Healthcare is always needed. I would actually add employer-sponsored insurance there in terms of stability among payers. And so it continues to be an attractive industry to invest in because the needs are so great. And you've got reimbursement that, yes, while there are some vicissitudes over time, at its core, it's a pretty stable industry. Specialty services, dental, another one where I've been working on. We don't have an announcement ready yet, but Welsh Carson has spent a lot of time looking at this. And that's, I'm a health services researcher, as Murray mentioned. I know that we have this artificial demarcation between oral health and physical health. It has not served the country well. One of the top 10 reasons why people use emergency departments is because of oral health issues, pain in their teeth or mouth. And imagine if it could be addressed with a stronger, with better access to dental care, stronger dental benefits management. And so we've zeroed in on that. One of the things you might start to see at the private equity level is just getting away, at least at Welsh Carson, getting away from the herd mentality. Because healthcare is complicated, and I think a more sophisticated understanding of not just the policy outlook, but also health services needs, I think is one of the differentiators. This is not a marketing play, it's just one of the differentiators for us. So you'll see lots of activity around specialty pharmacy, behavioral health, a lot of activity there. Think LIRA, think included health, think there's another one that's escaping me, the big one. Anyway, so there's a lot of activity in healthcare, and I think to the extent that these needs will continue, we will continue to see investments. Just to make a point on COVID and how it has accelerated investments in particular spaces, we've talked about alternative sites of care, particularly health at home. We've talked about telemedicine. Not me, but Dr. Malani, I think, actually talked about that. So that's pretty consistent. Modernization of clinical trials, again, a little bit under the radar, but if you think about the miraculous innovation that got us to multiple options for COVID-19 vaccine, that has spurred so much activity in terms of pharmaceutical research, vaccine development, etc. And so that again will not happen with government funding, at least it will not happen alone with government funding. You see a lot of private equity investments in that space. Healthcare provider consolidation, larger platforms. Lee Moore talked about this. I have been reading her papers, I told her, because it's been very educational. As again, we continue to think about, well, given what we know are some of these issues, at least from my perspective, how do you help? How do you solve a problem and not contribute to it while looking for places to invest and be a proper steward of our resources? Other points to mention, and I'll take just 30 seconds. Social determinants of health and data needs. You see a lot of investments in that space, some at the PE level, actually, just on the lower end, so maybe think 100 or so. There is so much activity in women's health. Most of them are earlier stage companies. Think from puberty all the way to I don't know how many menopause companies there are out there. It is a wonderful thing to see. There's going to be some consolidation in that market. Not all of them are going to be needed, but a lot of fertility and infertility care, a lot of earlier, women, like younger women, care from puberty onward. And one of the things I'm seeing is also they're not the same. They're all labeled women's health, but they actually tend to do very specific things. TIA is one that I've gotten to know recently. They do a lot of behavioral health as well as primary care. All of them are tech enabled. It's hard to start a company right now that isn't tech enabled and built on a solid platform, but they're not all the same. So I think for an area that had been long ignored, 51% of the population, go figure, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. There's a ton of capital in the marketplace right now. There is so much money. And so long as there's a lot of money, there will be, it's almost like a food fight. Whenever there's a company that comes on the market that looks like it's decent and knows what it's doing with decent leadership, there are a lot of bidders. There are a lot of interested parties who want to buy that company and invest in it and grow it and take it to the next level. So private equity in healthcare is super exciting, even for a policy person like me. And I will stop there. Thank you for the time.